No parent is ever prepared to hear that their child's life is hanging by a thread. Mike felt the weight of those words echoing through his mind as he watched Sam practicing his pitches in their backyard. Each movement the boy made, each determined smile as he hit his improvised target, seemed more precious than ever. Baseball wasn't just a hobby for Sam, it was a dream that had lit up his darkest days since his mother's death. But something was wrong. "Hey, Dad, want to see my pitch?" Sam called out enthusiastically, his eyes shining with hope. Mike tried to smile, but he couldn't help noticing how his son struggled to catch his breath. In recent days, Sam seemed more tired, stopping to rest after just a few minutes of practice. He remembered how the boy used to spend hours in the yard, tireless, dreaming of becoming a professional player. "Of course, champ," Mike replied, masking his worry. But Sam's smile faded as the ball slipped from his hand and rolled across the ground. The boy bent down slowly to pick it up, breathing heavily, and Mike felt his heart tighten. "It's okay, Dad. I just need to rest a little," Sam said, sitting on the grass, his face pale. That was all Mike needed to decide it was time to get help. At the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. The doctor entered the room with a serious expression, carrying an invisible burden that left Mike breathless. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry. Your son has a severe heart condition. If he doesn't have surgery soon, he won't be able to play sports, and his life will be at risk." Those words cut through Mike like a sharp blade. He looked at Sam, who was peacefully asleep on the hospital bed, unaware of the imminent danger. How could he save his son's life when he could barely keep the household afloat? Mike left the doctor's office, fighting back tears. The auto shop was on the brink of bankruptcy, and he knew he would never have the money to pay for such an expensive surgery. But he had to find a solution. For Sam's sake, he would face any obstacle. The dream of becoming a baseball player seemed distant now. The only thing that mattered was saving his son's life. Mike left the hospital with a vacant stare and a heavy heart. The news of Sam's illness felt like an unending nightmare. The cold night breeze brushed against his face as he wandered through the empty streets. He needed a solution, and he needed it fast. But how could he possibly raise the exorbitant amount for surgery when he barely had enough to pay this month's rent? The next morning, Mike opened the shop earlier than usual. He tried to keep his hands busy, fixing engines, but his tormented thoughts wouldn't leave him alone. With every turn of the wrench, he wondered, how many cars would I have to fix to come up with that amount? 1,000? 2,000? It was impossible. He made the difficult decision to sell his car, the only valuable asset he owned. The amount he got seemed like a drop in the ocean compared to what he needed. With the money in hand, he headed to the bank to ask for a loan. But the manager barely glanced at him before turning him down. He tried other banks, only to receive the same cold response. No collateral, no credit. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell, but we can't help you," they repeated with the same dry, indifferent tone. Back at the shop, Mike collapsed into a chair, exhausted and defeated. With his head in his hands, he wondered what else he could do. The image of Sam in the hospital, so fragile and weak, haunted him. He needed to be strong for him. On the third day after the diagnosis, Mike received an urgent call from the hospital. He raced there, his heart pounding. When he arrived, he found his son in bed, struggling to breathe, his face pale and drained. The sight of his once lively boy, now so vulnerable, almost broke him. Sam was getting worse, and they needed to act quickly. The doctor approached, concern etched on his face. "Mr. Mitchell, Sam's condition is deteriorating rapidly. He can't wait much longer. The surgery needs to happen soon, or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Mike understood. Without the surgery, Sam wouldn't survive. It shattered him. Mike left the hospital feeling utterly helpless. He went back to the bank, determined to try one last time. It was his third visit that week, pleading for assistance, but he knew they were tired of seeing him. So as soon as he stepped inside, the manager, a stout man in a perfectly tailored suit, glanced up and sighed with irritation. "Mr. Mitchell, we've already discussed this. There's nothing more we can do for you." Mike took a step closer, desperation radiating through his every move. "Please, I just need a little more time. I'll pay it back however I can. I'll do anything. I can't lose my son." His voice trembled, the words tumbling out in a rush. The manager's eyes swept over him, filled with disdain. Mike was dressed in his work clothes, stained with grease and worn at the knees. His exhausted face did nothing to stir any sympathy. "You've been here twice already this week," the manager said coldly. "We have our policies, Mr. Mitchell, and honestly, I don't believe your story. How can someone who can't even dress properly expect to get a loan of that amount?" The words cut deep. To the manager, Mike was just another desperate man trying to scam his way into money. The man had no idea that Mike was fighting for the life of the only child he had left. But still, Mike begged. "I'm not lying. I can show you the medical reports, the hospital bills." His voice wavered. "I just need someone to believe me." The manager sighed and shook his head. "We've wasted enough time. Please leave." Mike felt his world crumble. Humiliation burned his face. Slowly, he turned around and left the bank, his legs shaking. Outside, the cold wind sliced through him like knives. He walked aimlessly until he reached a nearby park and collapsed onto a bench. With his head bowed and his hands trembling, Mike allowed himself to cry for the first time in years. The memory of his wife, who had died far too young, mixed with the image of Sam struggling to breathe in the hospital. The pain was unbearable. "God," he whispered, his voice broken by sobs. "Why does it have to be like this? Take me instead. I can't lose him too. Please, take me." The chapter ends with Mike sitting on the bench, drained of all hope, as night falls around him, bringing with it an oppressive silence and the crushing feeling that hope is slipping away with every second that ticks by. After leaving the bank, Mike wandered aimlessly through the city streets. His mind swirled between memories and the harsh reality he faced. The manager's humiliating words echoed in his head like a hammer, pounding relentlessly. The image of Sam, fragile and struggling to breathe, was a suffocating reminder that time was running out. He needed to do something. Anything. That's when, on an impulse, a desperate and insane idea took hold of him. Maybe it would catch people's attention in a way his pleas and tears hadn't. Mike headed to the city center, where large crowds gathered every day. He climbed onto the base of a marble statue in the middle of the square and started shouting, his voice filled with pain and despair. "Hey, you there," he yelled, drawing curious glances and a few mocking laughs. "Has anyone here ever had a child on the brink of death? Has anyone lost everything and still fought to hold on to hope?" The crowd began to murmur. Some stopped to watch, but most just gave indifferent looks. Mike felt his chest burn with frustration, but he continued, ignoring the laughter and whispers. "My name is Mike Mitchell, and my son is dying," he shouted, his voice nearly breaking. "I need money for a surgery that could save his life. I've sold everything I had. I went to every bank, and all I got were closed doors and looks of disdain." He paused, taking a deep breath to hold back the tears. I'm just asking for a chance to save my son." People continued to pass by him. A few paused, whispered something to their companions, and moved on. A man in a suit and tie rolled his eyes before quickening his pace. An elderly woman clutched her purse closer, as if afraid he might be a thief. No one offered help. No one spoke a word of comfort. "Do you all have hearts of stone?" Mike screamed, feeling his voice falter. "I served this country. I fought for it in a war and saw things no man should ever see. And now, no one will even look at me." He stepped down from the base of the statue, collapsing onto his knees on the cold, dirty ground. His dirty hands dragged across the pavement as thick tears ran down his tired face. "God, why is this happening?" he murmured, his words choked by sobs. "I always tried to be a good man. I fought and put my life on the line for other people. I've already lost my wife, and now my son too. I have nothing left. There's nothing more I can do." Mike lifted his face to the cloudy sky, as if expecting an answer. But silence was the only response he received. A crushing silence, indifferent to the pain he felt. He closed his eyes, the tears flowing freely. "If someone has to go, let it be me, not him. Take me, God. Take me in his place." Suddenly, a firm and familiar voice sounded behind him. "Mike, I know you've done this before. You've sacrificed yourself once for someone you barely knew." Mike turned slowly, still on his knees. Standing before him was Robert Richardson, looking at him with a gaze that mixed empathy and determination. Mike blinked, confused. "Who?" He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't respond. "It's me, Mike. Robert Richardson," the man said, stepping closer. "And I'm not just some stranger who heard about your story. I know you. We fought together, in the war, and I'm alive today because of you." Mike's jaw dropped, trying to piece it all together. The memory of those dark days in the war came rushing back. And then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit him. A rainy night, gunfire coming from all directions. A comrade fallen in a minefield, on the brink of death. He remembered risking his life to pull him out, dragging him to safety as bullets whizzed past his head. "It was you," Mike whispered, his voice faltering. I thought you had died." Robert smiled, a sad smile. "I almost did. But you saved me. And since then I swore that if I ever had a chance to repay you, I would. I saw your story in the local papers about what you did today, about your son's condition. And I couldn't just stand by. You risked your life for me, and now it's my turn to do the same for you." Tears streamed down Mike's face, even harder now. What was this, a miracle? After everything he had been through, someone had appeared to offer him a helping hand. "Robert," Mike murmured, his voice trembling. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I'm going to cover all of Sam's surgery expenses. He's going to be fine, Mike. I promise." Robert extended his hand to help Mike stand up. "Now it's my turn to save a life." The chapter ends with Mike accepting Robert's help, both standing together as the crowd around them finally begins to realize that something extraordinary had just happened. Hope, which seemed lost, was rising from the ashes once more. Mike felt a flicker of hope reigniting within him as he returned to the hospital alongside Robert. The promise of financial help for Sam's surgery had turned the darkness into light. For the first time in days, he believed everything could work out. "I've spoken to the hospital," Robert explained as they quickly walked down the corridor. "They're already preparing the operating room. We just need to settle the payment and finalize the paperwork." Mike nodded, relieved. He didn't want to be away from Sam, but he knew that to ensure the surgery, he had to stay with Robert at the reception desk. When they arrived, the clerk asked for the necessary documents, and Robert promptly handed over his card to cover the costs. A tense silence enveloped them as they waited for the transaction to be processed. On the other side, nurses moved swiftly to get Sam ready. The bed was wheeled into the pre-op area, and he began receiving light sedatives. The boy looked around, searching for his father, but Mike was still at the reception desk. "He'll be here soon, sweetheart," one of the nurses said gently, trying to reassure him. Back at the reception, the situation took an unexpected turn. The clerk frowned as he glanced at the computer screen, and then at Robert. "Sir, it appears there's an issue with the transaction." Robert furrowed his brow. "What do you mean? The card should have more than enough to cover all the costs." The clerk sighed and turned the screen so Robert could see. "The amount is too high for a single transaction on this card. Given the time of day and it being a Friday night, the bank won't authorize a payment of this size until Monday morning." Mike felt his stomach drop. He looked from Robert to the clerk, unable to believe what he was hearing. "No, that can't be. We're talking about my son's life." Mike exclaimed, his voice rising in panic. "You have to do the surgery now. We can't wait until Monday." The clerk winced under Mike's intensity but maintained his firm stance. "I understand, Mr. Mitchell. But we need payment confirmation before we can proceed with the surgery. It's hospital policy and we can't make exceptions even in emergency situations." "You can't be serious," Mike shouted, feeling his blood pounding in his temples. "He could die by then." Robert tried to step in, his expression distressed. "Please, there must be something we can do. I can guarantee the amount. Sign a form. Whatever is needed." But the clerk shook his head. "The procedure is clear. No payment, no surgery. I'm truly sorry." Mike couldn't believe what he was hearing. He thought of Sam, so vulnerable and frail, already prepared to go into surgery, and his nerves ignited like a fuse about to explode. "My son will die if you don't do the surgery," he yelled, stepping forward to the counter, his hands trembling. "Don't you have a heart? Don't you have a soul?" The clerk stepped back, shocked by Mike's sudden outburst. By now, everyone in the reception area was staring at them. Robert tried to calm him down, placing a hand on Mike's shoulder. "Mike, please, not like this. We'll find a solution." But Mike couldn't hear anything anymore. Everything felt distant and blurry. The thought of losing Sam consumed him. His lungs seemed incapable of drawing in enough air. He felt his heart racing, pounding erratically in his chest. His face burned, sweat poured down his forehead, The room around him spun, and then a thick darkness swallowed his vision. "Mike!" Robert shouted, but it was too late. Mike collapsed onto the reception floor unconscious. The scene froze in a moment of pure anguish. Nurses and doctors rushed towards him. Chaos erupted. But all Mike felt was emptiness, the darkness pulling him further away. Amidst the panic and shouts, Mike's body lay sprawled on the ground, while Robert, wide-eyed and helpless, watched everything unfold, powerless. Robert watched Mike's unconscious body on the hospital reception floor, his heart clenched with anguish. The scene felt like a distant echo of another time, another place. He blinked, and suddenly he was back on the battlefield, amidst chaos and destruction. He was lying on the ground, his leg bleeding and his body trapped under debris. He remembered the fear he felt, the sound of explosions around him and the scream of pain that escaped his throat. That was when Mike appeared. With unshakable bravery, he advanced through the gunfire, dragging Robert to safety. Even with the risk of death, Mike didn't hesitate. He grabbed Robert's arm, pulled him up, and ignored his own wounds and pain, getting him out of there just in time. Robert owed his life to this man now lying before him. The sound of doctors trying to revive Mike brought Robert back to the present. He felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't fail him now. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After a few seconds, a deep and authoritative voice answered on the other end. "This is Judge Harold White." "Harold, it's me, Robert Richardson. I need a favor, and it's urgent." The judge's voice softened. "Robert, it's been a long time. Tell me, how can I help?" Robert took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "I'm at the hospital, trying to pay for a surgery for a friend's son. But the hospital is refusing because the payment can't be processed until Monday, and the boy doesn't have that kind of time. He could die if he isn't operated on now." There was a pause on the other end. Then Harold's voice returned, firm and decisive. "This is absurd. If the boy's life is at risk, there's no reason to delay the surgery over bureaucratic issues." He paused. "I'm going to draft an injunction right now, ordering the hospital to perform the surgery and wait for payment until Monday." Robert felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, Harold. I don't have the words to express how grateful I am. You saved my daughter's life when she had complications during childbirth, remember?" The judge's voice softened. "Consider this a small repayment. I'll email you the document in a few minutes." With the judge's help, Robert obtained the injunction, and in less than an hour he handed the document to the hospital administration. The doctors, pressured by the court order, agreed to start the surgery immediately. While Mike remained unconscious, Sam was taken into the operating room. The atmosphere was tense. Robert watched through the glass, unable to shake off the nervousness. As the procedure began, he noticed the doctors faced difficult and risky decisions. Sam's condition was more severe than they had anticipated. In the middle of the surgery, a new doctor entered the room, Dr. Jonathan Clark, one of the most experienced pediatric heart surgeons in the country and a longtime friend of Robert. Jonathan took charge and with steady and sure hands began guiding the team through each step of the procedure. He made crucial decisions that undoubtedly saved Sam's life. What initially seemed like an uncertain and complicated surgery turned into a resounding success. Every movement Jonathan made was executed with precision, and after endless hours, he emerged from the operating room with a slight smile. "The boy is strong," he said, meeting Robert's gaze. "The surgery was a success. It will take time for him to recover, but he made it. It's a miracle we got to him in time." The next day, Mike slowly opened his eyes, his body still weak and his mind foggy. The hospital lights blurred his vision, and it took him a moment to get his bearings. He felt someone beside him and turned his head slowly. Robert was there, sitting by his side, his face marked by exhaustion but with a look of deep relief. "Robert!" "What happened?" Mike murmured, his voice hoarse. Robert leaned closer, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Sam is out of danger, Mike. The surgery was a success, a real miracle." Tears welled up in Mike's eyes, a mixture of overwhelming relief and gratitude. He couldn't believe that after all the struggle and suffering, he finally had the news he had longed to hear. Mike looked at Robert intently, trying to process everything. "How did you manage to do it?" Robert just shook his head, smiling humbly. "I just repaid what you did for me. You saved my life that day. Now, I've saved your son's." Mike, unable to find the words to express the depth of his gratitude, held Robert's hand tightly. The hope that had seemed to disappear now shone brightly, and a new beginning was dawning on the horizon for him and for Sam. Mike still felt a little dazed as he was led to the pediatric ICU. The nurse guided him through the white, silent corridors where the sound of their footsteps echoed softly. Each step seemed to bring a mix of anxiety and hope, as if at any moment he would wake up and realize that it was all just a dream. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm taking you to Sam's room. He's still under the effects of the anesthesia, but he's already starting to show signs of recovery," the nurse said with an encouraging smile. Mike nodded, the words barely registering in his mind. His heart pounded rapidly, as if it were trying to escape his chest. When the door to Sam's room opened, Mike's breath nearly stopped. He entered slowly, his eyes immediately locking onto the small bed in the center of the room where Sam lay. Sam looked fragile, surrounded by wires and monitors tracking every heartbeat and breath. But even so, the boy's serene face conveyed a peace that Mike hadn't seen in a long time. He approached slowly, his hands trembling, and sat down beside the bed, taking in every detail of his son's face. The long eyelashes, the cheeks flushed for the first time in days. "Sam," Mike murmured, his voice breaking. "Daddy's here." Sam's eyes fluttered open slowly. At first, they were empty and groggy, still clouded by the lingering effects of anesthesia. But then, as if a beam of light illuminated his gaze, he recognized his father's face. A weak but genuine smile appeared on Sam's lips. "Dad," the boy whispered, his voice frail and hesitant but full of life. Mike let out a muffled sob and leaned closer, holding Sam's small hand in his. It was as if, in that simple touch, he could feel the miracle that had taken place. Silent tears streamed down his face, but this time they were tears of relief, of pure joy. "You did it, son," he murmured. His eyes locked onto Sam's. "You made it." Sam blinked slowly, still confused, but the smile remained. I knew you'd help me, Dad. I knew you wouldn't give up on me." Mike laughed through his tears, the sound interrupted by emotion. He brought Sam's hand to his lips and kissed it gently, as if thanking the heavens for having him there, alive and recovering. "I will never give up on you, Sam. Never." At that moment, the door to the room opened softly, and Robert stepped inside. He stayed silent, watching the reunion between father and son, not wanting to intrude. But Mike glanced at him and motioned for him to come closer. Robert walked over to the bed, a smile of satisfaction and emotion on his face. "Look, Sam," Mike said, his voice choked with emotion. "This is the man who helped save your life. He's a hero, like the ones you always wanted to be." Sam turned his head slowly, his curious and grateful eyes landing on Robert. "Thank you," the boy whispered, with difficulty but clearly. Robert knelt beside the bed, his eyes filled with tenderness. "You don't need to thank me, champ." He let out a soft laugh. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. Your dad saved my life many years ago, in a very dangerous place. I just did what he would have done for me." Sam blinked, processing those words. Then he looked at his father, who was smiling, and turned back to Robert. "So, he's a real hero?" Robert nodded firmly. "The greatest of them all, Sam. And I was lucky to know him." Mike smiled, squeezing his son's hand even tighter. There was so much to say, so much to be thankful for, but for now, the meaningful silence they shared was enough. "How about we play baseball together as soon as I get out of here, Dad?" Sam murmured, his eyes starting to close again, exhaustion winning over. Mike laughed, feeling his heart overflow with joy. "I think that's a great idea. We'll play as many games as you want, son." As Sam drifted back into a peaceful sleep, Robert stood up and placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. "He's going to be okay, Mike. The recovery will be slow, but he's strong, just like his father. You have a bright future ahead of you." Mike nodded, his face still wet with tears. "Thank you, Robert." He turned to his friend, looking him directly in the eyes. "You've given me more than just my son's life. You've given me hope again." Robert shook his head. "I just returned the favor, Mike. Thank yourself for being the man you are." And with a smile he added, "And don't forget, that baseball team is going to need a coach." Mike chuckled softly, the sound resonating gently in the quiet room. Beside Sam, he felt that, for the first time in a long time, everything would be all right. Months after the surgery, the sun shone brightly in the clear blue sky as Sam, now fully recovered, ran across the baseball field. His wide smile lit up his face, and the energy with which he threw the ball proved he was stronger than ever. On the other side of the field, Mike watched with eyes full of pride, as if each pitch was a personal triumph. Everything was different now. The fear and pain had transformed into joy and hope. "Come on, Sam!" he shouted, clapping as the boy delivered a perfect throw. Robert stood beside Mike, smiling as well. "He's a natural talent," Robert remarked, watching the boy intently. "I think we might see him in the big leagues one day." Mike laughed and shook his head. "Maybe, but the most important thing is that he's here, healthy and happy." He looked at Robert, his eyes filled with gratitude. "None of this would have been possible without you. I thank God every day for what you did for us." Robert shrugged, his eyes shining. "You saved my life once, Mike, and now I see that I didn't just save Sam's life. I saved the life of a man who deserved all of this and more." Mike nodded, and a comfortable silence settled between them. Sam waved from the field and began to run towards them, his hair blowing in the wind, his smile even brighter. "Dad, that throw was for you," the boy shouted, tossing his glove high into the air. When Sam leapt into Mike's arms, they both laughed, and Robert watched them, his heart warm. Life was full of twists and challenges, but in that moment everything felt perfect. Love, gratitude, and hope were what truly mattered. The epilogue ends with Mike, Sam, and Robert standing together on the baseball field, showing that no matter how dark the nights may be, there is always a new day waiting to bring light.